The rivalry between Sejanus and Agrippina escalated, eventually reaching a crisis point when Sejanus became impatient and openly plotted to harm Agrippina and Caligula. Tiberius could not tolerate such a direct threat against members of his family, with the result that Sejanus was abruptly denounced and executed. He was replaced as prefect of the Praetorian Guard by a man named Draco. During the last years of his life, Tiberius stayed in seclusion on Capri, and the son of Drusus, Gemellus, together with Caligula, were the candidates to succeed the throne. Both were still young and they were appointed as co-heirs. In AD 37, Tiberius finally died at the age of 77. Of the two rival heirs, Caligula appears to have been more ambitious, and he had secured the backing of Macro. With Macro's help, Caligula pushed aside a younger Gemellus and took power. At the time of his succession, Caligula was 25 years old, and at first he was greeted with enormous enthusiasm. His father Germanicus had been very popular, and this affection carried over to Caligula, who charmed the Senate, people, and army with his initial behavior. However, late in 837, Caligula fell ill with some sort of brain fever, and afterward, his behavior changed, and he became increasingly erratic and cruel. Caligula's irrational actions and decisions. He had Macro executed and forced Gemellus to commit suicide. There were many rumors of Caligula's depravity, including that he supposedly committed incest with all three of his sisters. To pay for his extravagance, Caligula ended up raising some taxes, imposing new ones, and confiscating the property of citizens that had he murdered for flimsy reasons. In a short time, his extravagances squandered the enormous treasury surplus that had been built up by Tiberius and plunged the empire into debt. One controversial aspect of Caligula's behavior, often raised as evidence of his insanity, was his apparent desire to be worshipped as a god. There is some ambiguity in the surviving sources regarding this issue, but some sources claim that he may have truly believed that he was some sort of divinity. He allegedly dressed up as various gods, spoke to them as equals, and had temples built for himself. One of the most notorious stories often linked to Caligula's insanity concerns his enthusiasm for chariot racing. He was particularly enamored for one horse named Incitatus, whose name might be translated as Speedy. At Caligula's order, a special stable of marble and ivory was built for Incitatus, and on the day before races, military units were posted around the neighborhood to ensure that no one made any noise so that Speedy might get a good night's sleep. Allegedly, Caligula planned to have his beloved horse, Incitatus, appointed to the post of consul, the highest government office. After less than 4 years of this sort of behavior, many were fed up with Caligula. Caligula and a conspiracy formed to assassinate him, and among its leaders were a number of officers of the Praetorian Guard who stabbed Caligula 30 times with their swords on January 24, AD 41. The events that followed the murder of the probably mad Emperor Caligula laid bare the reality of where true power now lay in the Roman Empire. Caligula was brutally hacked to death by his own Praetorian guardsmen and a group who were notionally charged with protecting the emperor's life. Then, while different factions of the Senate ineffectually squabbled over what to do next, the Praetorian Guard took matters into their own hands by acclaiming a new emperor of their choosing, Claudius, the 51-year-old uncle of Caligula and a brother of the popular general Germanicus. Most Romans, including the members of his own family, had always viewed Claudius with contempt because he had been born with a variety of physical abilities. Although he may have suffered from cerebral palsy as well as a number of physical disabilities, which made him an object of cruel mirth and scorn, he harbored a sharp mind. Claudius certainly seems to have tried his best to be a good emperor, but he had not been given the opportunity to gain any practical experience in leadership and government. Though outwardly respectful toward the Senate and other Roman elites, He had endured much ridicule at their hands and was therefore wary of them. Nevertheless, Claudius set in motion a number of significant initiatives. He established some important precedents by insisting upon the admission of Romanized provincial aristocrats into the Senate, a smart strategy that channeled the talents of people in regions conquered by Rome into working for the benefit of the empire rather than seeking to undermine it. Claudius was conscientious when it came to public works, particularly that those had practical focus. He constructed a major new aqueduct to ensure an adequate provision of water for Rome and gave attention to the food supply system of the capital city. Unlike Tiberius, Claudius took great pleasure in attending public games and entertainments. He also had held sumptuous banquets and distributed largesse in the form of both cash and gifts to the people. Claudius' third wife gave birth to his daughter Octavia and a son Britannicus, whom Claudius designated as his heir. Claudius' fourth wife was his own niece, Caligula's sister. Agrippina the younger, who had a son from a previous marriage named Nero. Nero was several years older than Britannicus, and Agrippina, the younger, insisted that Nero be groomed as a possible successor in the same manner as Britannicus. And yes, Claudius agreed, and Nero was adopted as his own son. At Agrippina's urging, Nero moved ahead of Britannicus and became the favorite heir, by making married to Claudius' biological daughter Octavia, Nero's own stepsister by marriage. And in AD 54, Agrippina poisoned Claudius. Nero, another crazy emperor. He was just 16 when he became emperor. However, Nero doesn't really have the full control when he started becoming the emperor. He is under control of his mother, his personal tutor Seneca, and a prefect of the Praetorian Guard Borus. For roughly the first 5 years of his reign, this triumvirate ruled the empire in a somewhat efficient manner on Nero's behalf, while he acted as figurehead and spent most of his time indulging his passions for music, theater, and entertainment. As Nero grew older, he started resenting his mother, and in AD 59, he had her executed on trumped up conspiracy charges. A few years later, Borus died, or according to some sources, he was poisoned, and Seneca was pushed to the side and eventually compelled to commit suicide. Nero was then free to embark on a career of terror, debauchery, and self indulgence. Not only did he have various senators, equestrians, and citizens killed, but he also murdered almost every member of his family, including his stepbrother Britannicus and his wife Octavia. During the time of Nero, the empire endured different crises, and two of which is that in Judea there was a dangerous insurrection when the Jews, incensed by the desecration of their temple, rose up against Rome. Second, the revolts spread and affected the entire province. And that's why Nero was forced to send an experienced general named Vespasian who suppressed the Jewish fighters. It was in the late 60s AD that he decided that he wanted to travel to Greece to compete in the great Panhellenic festivals, such as the Olympics, competing in various categories as an actor, a musician, and a charioteer. Nero happily collected no fewer than 1,808 prizes. His trip was cut short after a news about his own governors and generals was raised, they raised revolts against him, and that led to Nero's support rapidly eroded, and even the Senate declared Nero as a public enemy. And in June AD 68, as his foes closed in on him, Nero committed suicide. Nero's death sparked a true crisis for Rome. By this point, the institution of the Principate was well established, and Rome had become accustomed to the rule of emperors. There would be no return to the days of the Roman Republic. However, it had been firmly established that the emperors were chosen on the basis of heredity. Thus far, all emperors had been drawn from the extended Julio-Claudian family, and is the first set of emperors encompassing Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, and Nero, are today commonly referred to as the Julio-Claudians. Nero, the predations, however, had killed off nearly all his close relatives, so there were no obvious available Julio-Claudians to take his place. The process began with the governor of one of the Gallic provinces named Vindex, who revolted against Nero and gained the support of several other governors and their armies, including Galba in Spain and Otho in Lusitania. In the late 60s AD, oh wait, Galba had been sending enormous bribes to the soldiers of the Praetorian Guard as well as other military units in Italy, with the result that they proclaimed Galba emperor. With the troops both at Rome and in the provinces on his side, Galba thus officially succeeded Nero as the emperor. So Galba was proclaimed as new emperor. However, because Galba refused to pay the soldiers what he had also promised, and because of that, he ended being murdered and he was replaced by Otho, who secretly bribed as well the soldiers and promised them to receive huge sum of money. The ever fickle Praetorian Guard immediately abandoned their allegiance to Galba, and they murdered him and acclaimed Otho as the new emperor. One of the largest concentrations of soldiers was stationed along the German frontier, and one of the Roman commanders there, named Vitellius, harbored imperial ambitions. 38, the Roman Empire, from Augustus to the fall of Rome, he marched his army down to Italy, and that fought two gigantic battles against Otho's forces. Vitellius, it's not Vitellius, it's Vitellius. Vitellius' army won, and they defeated Otho, and then Otho committed suicide. Otho is capital O. Rome had Vitellius as its third emperor in less than a year. The so-called Year of the Four Emperors had witnessed the armies of Gaul, Spain, and Germany had created emperors, so the eastern troops thought that it was time to act. The legions of Egypt, Syria, and Judea proclaimed Vespasian, the general who had been successful at quelling the Jewish revolt, as their choice for emperor. In the last days of that eventful year of AD 69, a dejected Vitellius was slain by soldiers, and Rome had acquired its fourth emperor, Vespasian. So these are the four emperors who just took place and who just succeeded on just a span of 1 year. It's Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and Vespasian. The so-called Year of the Four Emperors had witnessed a destructive cycle of civil wars as provincial governors from every corner of the empire had abandoned their posts and marched on Rome with their armies to battle one another for supremacy. When the bloodbath ended and the dust settled, the one left standing was Vespasian, and his succession in the final days of AD 69 brought welcome stability to the Roman Empire. Vespasian and his sons, collectively known as the Flavian Emperors, after their family name, would rule for the next 27 years. At the time of his accession, Rome's new emperor was 60 years old and already had a long and successful record as a general and administrator. Vespasian was exactly what the empire needed to get things back on track at this moment of crisis. Now let's have the Flavians, Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian. The Flavian Emperors, Vespasian brings order. Vespasian was a good administrator and enacted a number of useful measures. Between Nero's having murdered numerous senators and many others have fallen in the recent civil wars, their number had dropped to only about 200. And because of this, Vespasian added at least 400 new members, selecting only men of experience and talent. He instated some new carefully chosen taxes in order to raise funds. His measures were successful and restored financial stability, Although he acquired a reputation for being stingy, he was in fact willing to spend large sums of money on projects that he thought were worthwhile and would benefit the people. He invested in major public works projects in Rome, like the vast new amphitheater. After ruling for 10 years, Vespasian fell ill with a fever and died in AD 79. Power passed seamlessly to Vespasian's son Titus, who was well liked and had already applied proven his own competence as both as general and administrator. Titus continued the policies of his father and set an even more conciliatory and generous tone, allowing exiled philosophers to return to Rome, outlawing treason trials, and cracking down on scrupulous informers. Although he had a slight reputation for wildness in his youth, Titus was sober and popular as emperor, and Rome seemed to set to enjoy a long stretch of prosperity. Unfortunately, series of dramatic disasters soon struck. A deadly plague, serious fire, and Mount Vesuvius violently erupted and buried the cities of Pompeii, Herculaneum, Oplontis, and Stabiae. Titus was active in providing relief to the victims, but after ruling for 26 months, he fell ill and died. Vespasian had two sons, Titus the elder, and he will have Domitian the younger. Things go downhill with Domitian, and now it fell to Domitian to take his brother's place as emperor. Domitian had not been as carefully groomed by his father to be a leader as Titus had been, and Domitian had not held the same range of military and civil positions. Nevertheless, Domitian had received a good education and had a reasonable amount of experience. So yeah, it was still hoped that he would continue the good precedent established by his father and brother. As emperor, Domitian proved to be more like Caligula or Nero. He, like he disrespected the Senate, spent enormous amounts of money building himself a grandiose new palace complex atop the Palatine Hill, and engaged in a variety of eccentric behaviors. Like Nero, he seemed to believe in his own divinity and preferred to be addressed as Lord and God. While its leader may have been unbalanced, the bureaucracy set up by Vespasian continued to function reasonably efficiently, so the empire kept running without too much turmoil. Domitian ruled for 15 years. As time went on, he grew increasingly paranoid and had many senators put to death on suspicion of plotting against him. This became a self fulfilling prophecy, because fear for their lives likely prompted his potential victims to form actual conspiracies. Eventually, in 1896, one of these was successful, and he was assassinated in his own bedroom by a group of palace servants. And this time, let's go to Rome, as what they referred this time the Golden Age. The Golden Age. The Golden Age of Rome, Emperor Nerva. The end of the Julio-Claudian's family reign as emperors in AD 68 had resulted in terrible violence and civil war, and the demise of the Flavian dynasty in AD 96 might have produced a similar tragedy, but this calamity was averted by the Senate quickly nominating a man named Nerva to be the next emperor. Nerva's chief virtues were that he was boring and old. He was clearly chosen as a safe and temporary stopgap measure to fill the leadership void in the short term and thus buy time while the Romans figured out what to do next. Nerva perfectly fulfilled his intended role, doing nothing controversial and then expiring from natural causes. The most important thing Nerva did during his brief reign was to carefully consider who might make the best successor. His choice fell on a dynamic up and coming Roman aristocrat named Trajan, who had already amassed a long and successful record of military and civil service. However, the Romans could not bring themselves to entirely break with the hereditary tradition, so Nerva officially adopted Trajan as his son, despite the fact that Trajan was already 44 years old. The Golden Age of Rome, the five good emperors. This then was to be the new model for how to choose emperors. Rather than just picking his son, the current emperor would instead select the best qualified person and then adopt that person as his son. For roughly the next century, each of the emperors would follow this template, and each one turned out to be a sensible and competent ruler. Accordingly, this group, beginning with Nerva in AD 96 and running until the death of Marcus Aurelius in AD 180, had become collectively known as the Five Good Emperors. And the second century AD, when they ruled, is widely regarded as marking the high point of Roman civilization. In this period, the empire reached its greatest geographical extent. There was peace, security, and relative prosperity for most of its inhabitants, and the emperors were mostly wise and just. During this time, Rome presided over about 50 provinces, and the empire sprawled across three continents and included 50 million inhabitants. The famous historian Edward Gibbon considered this time a true golden age and even called this era the happiest time in all of history.